Today we talked about the quadratic formula for solving quadratics. So just remember, this is the one method that will always work no matter what your quadratic is. But you still have to know all the other methods because some questions will ask you specifically about them. So we're going to run through 4 examples on the quadratic formula real quick. Most of these are ones that we did in your notes on the day 9 notes, I believe it was. So the first thing you have to do is always make sure that it is equal to 0. So this is equal to 2. So the first thing I need to do is move that 2 over here. So right now it's positive, so to move it over there, I would subtract it, subtract 2. We'd have 3x squared minus 12x minus 6 is equal to 0. From here, I pick out my a, b, and c. My a is 3, my b is negative 12, and my c is negative 6. Then I plug everything into the quadratic formula, which is right here. You guys don't have to have this memorized. It'll be on your EOC formula sheet, but the more you do it, chances are by the end of tomorrow and the end of this week, it'll probably be stuck in your head. So x is equal to the opposite of b. So if our b is negative 12, the opposite of that is just positive 12. Plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. So my b value was negative 12. So I'm going to have negative 12 squared minus 4 times a, which was 3, times c, which was negative 6. All of that over 2 times a. So, just a little refresher, this is where some people get stuck. So this 12, ooh, that didn't show up too pretty, and that 12 are both from that b value. And then the 3 after the 4 and this 3 are both from there. And this negative 6 is from c. And that 4 and 2, those are just part of the formula. So those are always going to be there. So then in my calculator, what I'm going to do is take this inside part. So this negative 12 squared times minus 4 times 3 times negative 6. I'm going to take that and I'm going to type that into my calculator. And then I'm also going to simplify this denominator. So nothing's going to change with this 12 out front. So we're going to have 12 plus or minus the square root of whatever we're about to get. So in my calculator, negative 12 squared, so parentheses, negative 12 squared minus 4 times 3 times negative 6, which is 216. So that 216 is what goes inside the radical. And then to get our denominator, what is 2 times 3? Well, that is 6. So then I need to know, okay, is 216 a perfect square? And if you're not sure, just type it into your calculator. So if it gives you a decimal like this, that means it's not a perfect square. If it's not a perfect square, you're going to have to make your factor tree. So 216 is an even number, which means I can divide by 2. So it's 2 times 108, which is 2 times 54. 54 is 9 times 6, 3 times 3, 3 times 2. So everything that we broke down, I'm going to cross out so it doesn't distract me. And then I need to make my pairs. So let's see, we have a pair of 3s. We also have a pair of 2s. So when I'm simplifying the square root of 216, a 3 and a 2 are both going to go on the outside, because there was a pair of each of those. And then on the inside, we're going to have this 3 and 2 that were alone. And then all we do is multiply. So 3 times 2 is 6. Square root of 6. So we're going to replace the square root of 216 with 6 square root of 6. So x is equal to 12 plus or minus 6 square root of 6 over 6. I'm going to split that into my two equations. 12 plus 6 square root of 6 over 6. That's a lot of 6's. 12 minus 6 square root of 6 over 6. And the last thing you have to do on problems like this, that you won't always have to do, but this time we do, is if we look at all the outside numbers, all the numbers on the outside here, outside of the radical, we want to see if we can divide them all by something. So 12, 6, and 6. Those are all divisible by 6. So 12 divided by 6 is 2. 6 divided by 6 is 1. Nothing happens to that. 6 divided by 6 is also 1. Now both of these ones are technically imaginary. So this is just 2 plus the square root of 6. Then over here the same thing. Again we have 12, 6, and 6. Those can each be divided by 6. So that would be 2 minus 1 square root of 6 over 1, which is just 2 minus the square root of 6. So our zeros, or our roots or solutions, or whatever the problem is asking you for, however they're wording it for this, would be 2 plus the square root of 6, 2 minus the square root of 6. The good news is they're not always this messy. Sometimes you get whole numbers or fractions that are a little bit easier to deal with. So this was kind of an extreme example. So we're going to work on this one next. 4x squared minus 13x plus 3 is equal to 0. So it's equal to 0, which is good. Then we just jump into a, b, and c. A is 4, b is negative 13, c is 3. Plug everything in. The opposite of b, so if b is negative 13, then we'd have positive 13, plus or minus the square root of b squared, minus 4 times a times c, all over 2 times a. Again, from here we want to simplify the discriminant and the denominator. So I know that that 13 is going to stay the same. I'm still going to have a radical, and I'm still going to have a fraction. So the first thing I'm going to do is simplify this part, and when I get an answer, I'm going to put it inside this radical. So I'm going to type it into my calculator the same way I have it written on my paper. So I start with a parentheses, negative 13 parentheses squared, minus 4, parentheses 4, parentheses 3. Oh, not that. So that gives me 121. Then I'm going to multiply the bottom. 2 times 4, and that's going to go in my bottom here. So 2 times 4 is 8. Hopefully you guys know the square root of 121. It's a perfect square, but if you don't, use your calculator, that's okay. Just know that on the EOC, you guys are going to have non-calculator questions, so you're going to have to know these things by heart. So the square root of 121 is 11. So that means I can replace that with an 11 over here. So I'm going to have 13 plus or minus 11 over 8. Then break it down into 2. One will get the plus sign, one will get the minus sign. So we'll have 13 plus 11 over 8. 13 minus 11 over 8. 13 plus 11 is 24. 24 divided by 8 is 3. 13 minus 11 is 2. 2 over 8 would simplify to 1/4. Those would be your two solutions for that. Alright, the third one we're going to do, just like before, this one is not set equal to 0. So the first thing we have to do is move that 8. This time we're going to add it because it's negative. Now it doesn't have a like term over here, and our constants are always just going to go at the back. So we're going to have negative 3x squared plus 2x plus 8 is equal to 0. Our A is negative 3, our B is 2, and our C is 8. Plug them into the quadratic formula. See if I can fit it on here. So x is equal to the opposite of b. So b was positive 2, so the opposite of that is negative 2, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all over 2 times a. So again, the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all over 2 times a. So same as before, we are going to start with the discriminant and then move on to the denominator and simplify whatever we can. Nothing is changing with that negative 2. We're still going to have the radical and we're still going to have our fraction. So the discriminant is going to go inside. The denominator is going to go on the bottom. I'm going to type it in just like I have it written on my paper. I'm going to take away this formula because we don't need it anymore. So parentheses 2, parentheses squared, minus 4, parentheses negative 3, parentheses 8. I get 100. So that's going to go inside my radical down here. 2 times negative 3 is negative 6. Hopefully you guys know 100 is a perfect square. If not, use your calculator. But the square root of 100 is 10. Now I can split down into my two equations. Negative 2 plus 10 over negative 6. Negative 2 minus 10 over negative 6. Negative 2 plus 10 is 8. If you reduce that, you'd get negative 4 over 3. This one's going to become negative 12 over negative 6, which is a positive 2. Then the last one, first thing we got to do is get it set equal to 0. This one is not, so I need to move that 3 by subtracting. 4 minus 3 is 1. 9x squared plus 6x plus 1. A is 9, B is 6, C is 1. X is equal to the opposite of B, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Fill in my discriminant, parentheses 6 parentheses squared minus 4 times 9 times 1, which is 0. Fill in my denominator. 2 times 9 is 18. Some of you guys got a little stumped by this one, the square root of 0. When in doubt and you have your calculator, you can plug it in. It is in fact just 0. So this will break down to negative 6 plus 0 over 18. Negative 6 minus 0 over 18. Hopefully you guys are trying to see that these are going to be the same, because there's no difference in adding and subtracting the 0. I'm just running out of room. So on this one, we have the same answer twice, which means that you only really have to write it one time. And that should make sense because we talked about on Friday, when our discriminant is 0, that we only have one solution. Whereas over here, when our discriminant is positive, we have 2 solutions. So that's it. So just remember, this is your formula. This little negative sign is really just the opposite. So if b is positive, you'll make it negative. If b is negative, you'll make it positive. Remember to always put things inside parentheses before you plug them into your calculator. And remember to make factor trees if something's not a perfect square. And that's it.